Adverbs aren't the demon that many people make them out to be. When used right, they can be very helpful in moving a scene along instead of spending 3 paragraphs describing an action. They stop using contractions, they'll stop using slang, and suddenly everybody, even the backwater James Bubba that lives in the swamp, speaks Oxford English. It doesn't work that way. You really need to embrace the voice of each character.
This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat, Sleep, Write podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Rolling on 6. On 6.
Welcome to episode 43. If you enjoy the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, or if you had your own success in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, please write me. The email address is comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Thanks for leaving me a short message about the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Once again, the email address is comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Beth Harvey, welcome to the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. It's wonderful having you with me here today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and to be able to share this experience with you.
Full disclosure, Beth will be taking a very active role within Eat, Sleep, Write in a variety of ways, including, but certainly not limited to, overseeing our blog, as well as being a recurring guest host during the Eat, Sleep, Write roundtable conversations. Being an editor, you read a lot.
I read a lot of books. It's my profession. Most of them are fiction. I particularly like stories about fantasy and mythology. Right now I'm neck deep in the Dresden series by Jim Butcher, and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm also a big fan of Neil Gaiman, Garth Nix, and Raymond E. Feist, as well as Anne McCaffrey.
There are a lot of people out there that really believe in this stuff.
I don't really believe that it's true. I just very much enjoy the stories because I can separate the real world from the fantasy world and just take off into a land of dragons and magic without having to worry about the rent due tomorrow or other such mundane factors.
Did you write before you turned to editing?
I started out writing. I've been writing since I was a little kid. I mean, some of my earlier stories are god-awful and maybe still on the refrigerator, but it's been a passion.
When did you start writing?
I was 8 when I started writing stories. I have a couple of journals where I spun little yarns to myself.
Tell me a little more about why you switched from concentrating on writing to becoming an editor.
I don't know if I'd call it a switch in concentration. I would just call it a secondary path to what I'm doing. I started working with a publishing company, which is when I learned to edit. It's just become sort of a passion of mine to help other writers achieve their dreams of publication and make their writing the best it can be. It's just sharing the journey with other writers in a different way.
You're an editor and a published author. How did you end up in this rather unique position?
That's a bit of a story. Like I said, I've always been a writer. Can't remember a time when I wasn't writing. When I met Dr. Tupper, I was working at a bar near my house as a karaoke host. Dr. Tupper was just beginning Divertir Publishing. We became friends very quickly. We hung out at the bar and chatted a lot between song sets, and he's a wonderful guy. He has a lot of understanding of the publishing industry. He signed me on to work with him pretty quickly. Spent a couple of years working for Divertir, and I gained a lot of skills and understanding there. Been a great experience. He's a wonderful person, and I would suggest anybody publish with that company.
When did you make the change to freelance?
About a year or so ago. I had some issues with time management that made it difficult to maintain this really rigid schedule that's required for publishing books. So I decided to back away from the publishing angle for a while and focus on the editing, where I don't have time constraints working with individual authors.
You have 2 books out now?
My first 2 projects with Divertir were short story collections. They were both edited by me and collected by me, but not all the stories are mine. I have 2 stories in them, and the titles are When Nightmares Fall and Damn Fairies. I also have a flash fiction piece and a collection titled Under the Stairs by Lisa Keel, who also worked for Divertir at the time.
Tell me about your writing process.
That's a complicated question because it changes day to day. Sometimes it'll just happen, and other times I have to drag it out of me with a rake. There's no real process to it. It's just a haphazard, hey, I have a minute. I'm going to sit down and mash my keyboard and see if anything comes out. It's sort of the monkey in the typewriter process.
What's the most common issue you've encountered when editing a manuscript?
Pacing. I have met very few authors that really understand the importance of pacing. Either their story drags horrifically, or it moves along so fast that you have no idea what's going on and they don't explain things well. It's a delicate balance and takes a lot of work and thought to achieve properly, and it's something that I work on with authors very strongly in the editing process. There are a lot of other problems I've seen too. Overuse of adverbs, repetitive words, sentence structure, grammar. Dialogue is also a big place where people hit a wall.
Do you think authors are too verbose?
Some writers are too verbose, others aren't verbose enough.
You mentioned adverbs. Do you hate them as much as some professional authors and editors?
Only if they're overused. I have a particular hatred of the word suddenly, but that's more of a PTSD response to a particular manuscript I worked on when an author I had worked it into about every sentence he could in each paragraph he wrote, and I have nightmares about that word now. It's awful, really. Adverbs aren't the demon that many people make them out to be. When used right, they can be very helpful in moving a scene along instead of spending 3 paragraphs describing an action. Verbose writing is a big issue. I know that too many adverbs will kill something. You want to describe things in concrete, simple language with the most basic words possible. Instead of saying, he ran jauntily down the road, you would just say, he dashed down the road. You'd substitute a solid verb.
What about dialogue? Are there really that many problems with it as authors write it out? I can't imagine that writing a conversation is all that difficult.
You'd be really surprised. People tend to forget how they talk. You don't think about, how it sounds in your head a lot of the time when you're doing dialogue. They stop using contractions, they'll stop using slang, and suddenly everybody, even the backwater James Bubba that lives in the swamp, speaks Oxford English. It doesn't work that way. You really need to embrace the voice of each character, and that can be difficult, particularly if you're writing with a voice that isn't yours. So it does take a lot more forethought than you might expect.
You infer simplicity in writing, yet there's quite a bit that's complicated.
It can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. You just need to think out ahead of time what you're going to do. The point of it is to keep in your mind what your readers are going to hear. You want to think about everything. The first draft, of course, you just let go and write. But as you revise, you want to keep a number of different things in mind. The revision process is difficult. The writing process, just letting it go, that should be the easy part.
Which leads me to revisions. Love them or hate them?
Being an editor, I have sort of a love-hate relationship with them. I love helping people. I hate fixing my own work. It's like a 2-year-old being dragged out of a candy shop when I have to start fixing my own problems. It doesn't work out so well.
You recalcitrant delinquent, you.
I am, and I am unrepentant about it.
Drawing on your experience as an editor, do you have any advice for authors on their book?
The strongest suggestion I have is don't look at it as a game once you've finished it. The initial writing process should just happen. After that, it is work. If you want to see publication, it is work. Don't forget that fact. Do it for the art, do it for love of the written word and love of sharing your stories. Let that passion show in the initial manuscript. But don't assume that after you've written the first draft that you're done.
What about other editors? Do you have any advice for them?
Be honest, be fair. Make sure that if you're working with an author, you treat them properly. Leave your ego at the door. You're performing a service. You're being paid to give these people the best service you can. Make sure your price reflects the quality of editing you have. If you're a novice, don't price yourself like somebody who's gone freelance from Random House. I've seen authors pay out the nose for a so-called editor whose grammar and edits are based on Microsoft's grammar check. This, to me, is inexcusable.
What do you like best about writing? What do you like least?
The thing I like most about writing is sharing my stories and my little world with everybody else and having everyone jump in there with me and have as much fun as I'm having. The thing I like least about writing, I think, is the ego that becomes part and parcel to a lot of the individuals that are in this market. Between the writers, the editors, the publishers, the agents, people develop this assumption that because they've written a book, they're suddenly miles better than everybody else, and ooh, that annoys the bejesus out of me.
What inspires you?
It could be going to a movie, it could be reading a book, it could be taking a walk with my fiancé, it could be a dream. There's no set thing that inspires me to write. It just comes like lightning, and suddenly I have an idea that I need to jot down into a notebook before it runs away on little cat feet.
When do you do your best writing?
Around 3 a.m. when I'm stupidly tired and am too dumb to realize that what I'm writing makes no sense.
If you had to pigeonhole your stories, what genre would they fall under?
I have several in multiple different genres. I suppose the broadest brush I can paint them with is genre fiction. They're not really literary. They're just stories.
Is there such a phrase like a literary thriller, literary fiction? I don't understand. Is this a double entendre? What is going on with that?
I have no answer for you because I'm just as puzzled as you are. In my experience, when somebody slaps the word literary in front of it, it becomes this art piece that's supposed to have some kind of commentary on the evils of society or something. I don't understand it any better than you do, and I went to college and encountered people in the literary world, and it just puzzles me.
Sounds to me like the Department of Redundancy department.
Yeah, it pretty much is. A story should just be, if it's a thriller, it's a thriller. If it's a fantasy, it's a fantasy. The word literary to me just seems pompous. I'm sure I will get some fire for hearing that and saying that, but it's just how I think. Fiction should just be, it's topically based. The genre is just what your topic is. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that.
Where's your special thinking spot?
I have a couple. The one that I use the most is in front of my laptop, wherever my laptop is. The most spiritual would be my family has a cottage up in New York, and it's over the lake. At about 5 or 6 in the morning, there's this thick layer of fog over the lake, and I can just take my laptop or my notebook outside and sit on the deck, listening to the loons through the mist and write whatever happens to be in my head. Really an incredible experience.
When you write, are you like a faucet? Do the words just come pouring out of you?
Sometimes. Others, they have to be dragged kicking and screaming like a recalcitrant 2-year-old.
A concept was recently put forward to me that if you're struggling to get the words out, you're not really doing your job.
I'm not even sure I have words to address that. I've had writer's block, and I'm sure many writers have had writer's block, when it becomes very difficult to get anything on paper. And when you get it there, it becomes this incredible accomplishment, and you're proud of yourself. I don't think that you're not doing your job as a writer if you have struggles and issues sometimes getting words onto the page. It could be something as simple as I'm not sure how to get this scene where it should be going, or I haven't written anything in 6 months and I need to write something or I'll explode, but nothing's showing up. The job of the writer doesn't seem to be impacted by the difficulty of writing.
What do you like most about editing?
I love helping authors take their stories and make them shine, make them sparkle. I look at my job as almost a gardener. You look out in the garden and you see all these beautiful flowers and they're in brilliant bloom and they're spectacular and you see the glory and power of nature. But behind that, you've got somebody who's got fertilizer and a trowel and goes around weeding and giving them fertilizer and giving them love and helping them be that spectacular natural beauty that they are.
What do you like least about editing?
Authors.
Well, if you've got something to say, young lady, just let it out. Don't hold back.
And I say that with all the love in the world, but I've dealt with several authors when I gave them the most constructive, beneficial, and gentle criticism in the world, I suddenly became persona non grata in their world, despite the fact that sometimes they were paying me to do this. It's befuddling to me.
Tell me more about the story that you're going to read an excerpt from.
It is a flash fiction, which is a piece of literature that's under 1,500 words.